In 1818, in a scrappy frontier town of just a few thousand people clustered on the western bank of the Mississippi River, an academy for young gentlemen opened in the rented rooms of a private home, 1 block from the muddy riverfront. Founded by Bishop Louis de Berg in what would become the state of Missouri, the academy was eventually to be known as St. Louis University, the first university west of the Mississippi. The school was entrusted to the Jesuits in 1829 under the presidency of Father Peter Verhagen, and soon its student body and downtown campus began to expand, along with its namesake city. But the fledgling school was not without its growing pains. In 1836, St. Louis University established its first medical school, but within 20 years, a national political movement, the Know Nothing Party, was stoking anti-immigrant and anti-Catholic sentiment throughout the country. Demonstrations and then riots broke out, with hostility so intense that the medical school faculty voted to become independent from the university, and SLU's School of Medicine would not be reestablished until the early 20th century.
When the Know Nothing riots were breaking out, it's a reaction to immigrations really directed at the Irish. And this is a time in America where America was white, Anglo, and Protestant. And people were saying those people shouldn't be here. And this party is developed called the American Party. And their basic tenets were no to immigration, no to Catholics, and no to Jews. And people were marching on the medical school because they would do gross anatomy. And so the rumors went around town that the Jesuits were abusing the dead and all of that sort of thing. It was angry, but it wasn't like they were setting things on fire. It was just more intimidation. And so they voted to secede from the university. Look at the photographs that date back to the 1840s and 50s, and you see how substantial those buildings are. By the Civil War, it would have been maybe 3,000 to 3,500 students. And during the Civil War, half that student body was coming from the South. You couldn't get upriver, so that the St. Louis U almost closed because of that during the Civil War.
While the contributions of Bishop de Berg and Father Verhagen were significant, their use of enslaved persons to labor at the university represent the historic failure of SLU to live out the gospel values of its mission. Many who had no control of their own livelihood were significant contributors to the university's establishment and thriving. Although most of these individuals' names have been lost, the university is committed to reconciling this painful past with a hopeful future for the descendants of these SLU community members. The failure to incarnate the gospel values in the early years of the university's history is the catalyst for renewed commitment to transformative change. In 1867, the school, which was then located at Washington Avenue and 9th Street, purchased property at the corner of Grand and Lindell Boulevards in rural St. Louis, outside of the bustling downtown. More than 20 years later, the sprawling de Berg Hall opened at its current location, housing a chapel, classrooms, laboratories, a library, museum, the high school department, and the Jesuit community. The early 1900s saw tremendous growth and innovation under the leadership of Jesuit Father William Banks Rogers. During Rogers' tenure, the endowment rose to over $1 million, and in 1908, women were admitted to the university as law students. The academic curriculum expanded to include the College of Philosophy and Letters, the Dental School, and the new School of Commerce and Finance. In the following decades, despite the Great Depression and 2 world wars, SLU was able to initiate more new programs: schools of education, nursing, social service, an Institute of Technology, and an aviation engineering program. Co-curriculars thrived as well. Organized athletics began in the late 1800s, and the university sponsored a football team as early as 1886. In the 1900s, a strange Billiken frenzy took hold nationwide, a cultural phenomenon centered around a mythical creature serving as a good luck charm and representing things as they ought to be. When John Bender, a SLU law student, became the coach of SLU's Blue and Whites football team in 1910, many saw a resemblance between Bender and the Billiken, and the odd mascot of the school remains today.
Up until then, the early 1900s, they were, I guess, known just as the Blue and the Whites, the Blues and the Whites, because that was our colors. There was a young lady by the name of Florence Pretz. She was from Kansas City, of all places. She was an art student and actually wanted to be an art teacher. She started drawing these figures of what would eventually become the Billiken. So this became very popular in the States at that time. Really through Coach Bender, that's how the name got attached. Other than St. Louis University High School, St. Louis U High, we're the only school in the country that has Billiken as the mascot.
In the 20th century, St. Louis University was a rich source of ideas, thinkers, and leaders, attracting luminaries and cultural figures from throughout the country. In 1903, President Theodore Roosevelt came to SLU for a student event at the university library. In 1911, at the football season opener, President Taft threw a football to the team captain. Decades later, in 1964, President Lyndon Johnson planted a linden tree on the site of the future Bush Student Center. On October 12th of that same year, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. shared his vision for a more just nation with a standing room-only crowd gathered in the West Pine Gym. Dr. King's speech came just 20 years after African-American students were permitted to enroll at SLU. Although desegregation was resisted by many university administrators, Jesuit Father Claude Heighthouse confronted SLU's systemic racism in his now famous 1944 Heighthouse homily, where, from the pulpit of College Church, he asked the attending white students point blank if they would withdraw from SLU if black students were enrolled. They answered with a resounding no. A university-wide policy of admission for black students soon followed in 1944. Admission for women was also on the horizon. Although women had previously been accepted in graduate and professional programs, it was not until 1949 that the College of Arts and Sciences began officially enrolling women in undergraduate programs.
The Heighthouse homily, of course, that's the shorthand. There's a whole lot more into it. John Marcoux, he understands that Joe Pulitzer is pushing for the desegregation of the University of Missouri. And of course, he's got a voice, he's got a paper, he's got money. He goes down to the office and he says, look, with your support, we can do this at St. Louis U. Heighthouse writes this homily. He's also the advisor of the student paper. They also have that homily laid out and ready to go to press. The next day, it's in the student newspaper, it's in the Post-Dispatch. It just was embarrassing and the right thing to do.
In the context of 1944, to me that was pretty subversive, saying it's time to change this in a context where that was not the prevailing sentiment of a lot of people. And we know that that was not an easy time for those 5 students to be here. I often think about that. Jim Crow laws at the time, there was no place for them to eat. As I recall, those 5 students were the first to integrate any institution of education in the city. I have to constantly remind students that it was not always like this. I think we don't give enough opportunities to understand how we got here because it was not easy. And so when we talk about shoulders, the shoulders of those who got us here, we really need to honor the people who literally died for us to be here.
Mary Brimmer, she was a woman of firsts. I believe she came in 1938 as a first-year student, and she was the only female on the university newspaper, first dean of women, and then subsequently the first dean of students here at St. Louis University. And that's how I met her. She really became a mentor for me, and I know she was a mentor for countless others. We were in each other's lives until she passed away in 2021. She was here as a full-time staff member and a full-time volunteer for over 60 years. So she really was SLU. She embodied SLU. This woman was an incredible woman. We were very blessed to have her for 101 years on Earth. I mean, being inclusive, thinking about that back in 1938, 39, that's just unheard of, you know. So she definitely was a trailblazer.
From the end of the Second World War until 1974, Jesuit Father Paul Reinert served not just as president of the university, but also as a pioneer in Catholic higher education. He expanded the Board of Trustees to include lay people, initiated the Metropolitan College program to reach non-traditional students, and began a study abroad program in Madrid, Spain. He also ended the storied football program, noting that the expense of the program far outweighed any benefit for the greater good.
One of the underappreciated elements of any institution's history, including, I think, St. Louis U's history. From the very beginning, there's always been disagreement about who we are, what we should emphasize, what we should be doing, and it's been figured out because we're a community. Everyone believes that everyone else is trying to do the right thing. It's not that we're not going to make mistakes, because we have absolutely made mistakes as an institution, but they're going to be minimized because they've been shaped by other people of goodwill within this amazing institution. And I just have this deep conviction that we are going to figure it out together.
Throughout its history and the difficult history of its namesake city, St. Louis University's relationship with its local communities has seen triumphs and challenges. The 1980s saw significant development of the university's campus under the leadership of Jesuit President Lawrence Biondi. The 2010s and 2020s have brought a revival of Midtown St. Louis, led, in part, by the university. The historic 2014 appointment of Dr. Fred Pistello, the first non-Jesuit permanent president, broadened the scope of SLU's mission. In the wake of the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and closer to SLU, in the Shaw neighborhood, Von Derritt Myers Jr., whose father was a SLU employee, the Clock Tower Accords were drawn up, a turning point, initiating conversations and programming that would chart a new course for the university in living the faith that does justice. SLU promised to advance efforts to address inequality and poverty, both within the university and in the community.
So what you had in Mill Creek Valley was an overwhelmingly African-American community after the First World War, particularly. Because of Jim Crow and segregation in that day, they basically created an independent community that had grocery stores, that had schools, had churches, in some cases dilapidated stately homes, and then you had cold water flats, dirty industry, warehouses. Most of the residential stock was owned by absentee landlords, and so maintenance was not timely. Sometimes, the common restroom facilities would have been outside in the alley. There was a lot of money being made available to build public housing, and the bright idea was these people of the Mill Creek Valley were living in terrible conditions. At least that was how government perceived it. They didn't perceive it that way. Of course, they're not consulted. And then to just bring the headache balls in and the bulldozers. And there's only 3 buildings that didn't get torn down. At one point, it was so desolate that they called it Hiroshima Flats. 15,000, 20,000 people were displaced. People of means mostly went to North St. Louis. A lot of them did go to the Pruitt-Igos and other federal housing projects. There was a lot of pressure on Father Reinert to pick up the university and move it out west, because by the 60s, the neighborhoods around SLU is certainly run down. The businesses aren't there. The movie houses are closing. Father Reinert, to his credit, said, no, our history as educators has been to be in the midst of the cities, and St. Louis U is not going to go anywhere. And we had received a gift that allowed Father Reinert to start purchasing property on the east side of Grand. And so the first building that went up was Ritter Hall, and then the next was the Bush Student Center. Herman Stadium goes in, the Science Quad, then you just kind of keep on going until you get to Compton.
In 2017, the Midtown Redevelopment Corporation was established, fostering improved relationships with our city neighbors and enabling us to live the value of being men and women for and with others.
Dr. Pistello came to campus. He said, while this is a great place to live, the campus boundaries itself, what's happening around the campus? Why aren't there more places for the students to be able to go to for entertainment, for retail, and for jobs and those kinds of things? So St. Louis University, joining with SSM Health, said, what can we do for this area here? I've just been extremely impressed with St. Louis University. They want to make sure that the St. Louis community is helping make these decisions over what happens here. In the Gate District West neighborhood, or across the street in the Tiffany neighborhood, those residents, those neighborhood associations there, they ultimately get to make the decisions over what happens with their communities. And I have not heard of any other university in the country that has done that. It has put the residents in charge of the planning around their campus. Well, over 4 million people now every year are coming to Midtown, the City Foundry, the new Target, Topgolf. It's great for St. Louis University and, SLU's community, what's happening here, but this is a game changer for the city of St. Louis. And so to have an institution like St. Louis University help these areas just goes such a long way.
But the story of St. Louis University has never been simply a tale of presidents, scholars, and buildings. SLU's mission statement remains compelling: the pursuit of truth for the greater glory of God and for the service of humanity. This Catholic Jesuit mission has lighted the path forward for students, staff, clinicians, and faculty for more than 200 years. And today, through dozens of initiatives and partnerships that embody the ways in which the people who are St. Louis University live out its mission.
Casa de Salud is a community healthcare clinic at its core, at its heart, a medical and mental health care now for our regions under and uninsured, particularly with Spanish-speaking folks in the community who really struggle with language and cultural barriers. So our partnership with SLU, we like to call it foundational. Really, it is the bedrock of the organization. Casa de Salud currently sits on the campus of St. Louis University. We're very proud to be able to say we're part of the larger SLU family. I think it's the Jesuit mission, this idea of men and women of and for others, and ensuring that the entire community thrives together, is well together.
One of the great benefits of our new core, every student learns the history of the university in all of its successes and all of its failures, including moral failures. Students not only get the knowledge and skills they need to succeed, but also a core curriculum that is consistently asking them to stop, think about who they are, think about where they've been, that every student will be able to talk about what it has meant for them to go to St. Louis University.
Today, SLU is a community of students, teachers, and scholars living a contemporary version of a 200-year-old Jesuit-inspired educational vision. We are stewards of a profound academic mission that prepares students for lives of meaning and service, generosity, and success. We are embedded in the history and future of the city of St. Louis, even as we keep working to be better neighbors and stewards of our heritage. Guided by the light of the Holy Spirit and true to the inspiration of St. Ignatius and the first Jesuits, the people of St. Louis University now take the next step in writing the history that remembers yesterday, but begins anew today.
I was here from 1966 to 1969, and I joined the faculty in 1971. People ask me, why don't you retire? I love what I do. It's all about the formation of people. That's a unique possibility. And that's why I came, and that's why I stay.
It's important to know where a person works, a person where they're going to school. They're going to spend time, energy, and money. Being able to know the history, why things are the way they are.
We had our first lay president. He was acknowledging what was going around the world. We're more putting ourselves into the community, involving ourselves in the community.
I just like to tell people that you're becoming part of this story too, and I've spent, like I said, half a century of my life here, and I feel like I'm part of the story here, whether people want to know it or not.
We're part of a long tradition. The opportunity that this university has had to broaden lives and provide opportunities for people that have been transformative. It's a noble thing that's come into existence because of sacrifice and great desires to be makers of change for the better. It's not a 9-to-5 thing, although those may be the hours, but it's greater than just those hours. I sometimes just like to listen to the bells of the college church ring and step in there on a bright sunny day like today and see those sun streaming through those windows going, there were visionaries here before.
The history of SLU lives not only in our 200-year legacy, but is an ongoing story written by the people and community that make us St. Louis University.